Welcome to the Quark and Roll podcast. I am your host, Kwok Pui Lan. Today, I'm going to interview my former colleague, Dr. Tony Alonso, who teaches Catholic Studies at Canberra School of Theology at Emory University. In this episode, we will talk about composition of liturgical music as well as his scholarship in Catholic Studies. Welcome to the podcast, Tony.
Thank you, Pilan. It's good to see you. I miss you.
Thank you. And I want to begin by asking you, how early did you start to compose music?
Yeah, I started writing really bad songs when I was about 15 or 16 years old. I started writing a few songs for church, maybe a song or two for the person I thought was the love of my life at the time. And yeah, that kind of began a long journey of composition, but I hope nobody hears those songs that I wrote when I was 15 or 16.
You are a very accomplished composer, and you composed liturgical music for the Mass during Pope Francis' visit to the United States in 2015. Can you share your feelings about doing that important work?
That was an overwhelming invitation when I received it, and it came about in an indirect way. I had written all of these psalm refrain settings for a hymnal, maybe 5 or 10 years prior, very simple refrains. And when the committee that was preparing the music for Pope Francis's visit were looking for bilingual music, they came across one of those settings. And the director of music for the event called me and said, we would love to either commission you to write a more expansive version of this or something else. And I chose the something else because I didn't really love the original thing that I had written. And I wanted to write something really reflective of the occasion. So I was really honored by the invitation, especially because at the time, Pope Francis first visited Cuba, where my father was born and came from. And he made the journey from Cuba to the US to celebrate a Mass in Spanish and English. So having that kind of duality in me, I was very honored in a special way to write music for that. So I was very moved and I began the process. Really, I should also note that it was a controversial Mass because it was the canonization of Junipero Serra. And a lot of Indigenous folks, especially, were very outspoken. I still have ongoing conversations about a lot of the hurt that was experienced by folks by that. And I really wanted to find a way musically to sound something of Indigenous culture in the music, sound a little note of both celebration and dissent in the song. So I really began a process of studying that music, and it became the heartbeat of the psalm that I set, Psalm 96, Cuenten las maravillas, proclaim God's wonderful deeds to all the nations. And if you hear the song, you can look it up on YouTube. It's a very rhythmic polymeter piece reflective of many cultures.
Tony, for the audience who may not know much about Catholic history, can you tell us something about why the canonization was controversial and brought back very deep feelings?
So Junipero Serra was a Franciscan missionary to the U.S. and was a major force in colonizing indigenous peoples, especially on the West Coast in California, founder of the missions. So there's a lot of long history there to delve into, but there were a lot of mixed feelings about it. I felt that Pope Francis's visit was overshadowed in maybe a positive way by the canonization itself, that a lot of the people there were not even aware that the canonization was happening. It was more of the celebration of this Pope that had brought so much compassion and empathy in the world in a time when it felt like the church wasn't really as listening as it might be.
How different it is composing liturgical music from, shall we say, secular music?
I think about this question a lot, and how I think about it is some people put it as sacred secular, as that divide. And I think there's a lot of blurry lines. Like any of us who start with any kind of typology know that it does its best work when it starts to fall apart. And there's a lot of blurry lines between how people experience the sacred, experience God musically, especially through the arts in general, but in music especially. But I think of liturgical music as a subset of sacred music. So sacred music being all of that music that helps us connect with the divine, which can be really anything. And liturgical music, at least the way I see it, is something that's crafted especially for people to participate in with their voices and their bodies. So when I write liturgical music, I'm always thinking about the community for which I'm writing. Who's going to be singing this song? One. And two, when are they going to be singing it? And how is when they're going to be singing it going to shape its sound? So, for example, if I'm writing a song for a community here in Atlanta that is a bilingual community, Spanish and English, celebrating the Easter Vigil, and they're celebrating, say, baptisms at the Easter Vigil. All of those things are going to go into informing how I shape that piece, who's participating in it, when it's happening. And I think of liturgical music as highly contextual in that way. So, for example, if I just go to write a song that may be secular or sacred for that matter, in a general sense, I may or may not be thinking about all of those factors. I might just be thinking about my own personal expressive feelings. But when I write something for a community, I want to be as embedded as I can in that community, know as much about it as I can, and then write from that space.
It takes a lot of work, isn't it?
It is, but I've come to really love that part of it. When I write, especially, it can be hard. I find it easier to write for communities of which I've been a part because I know it's like teaching in a community of which you've been a part. You know the rhythms of life, you know the stories of the people around you, their deepest concerns and hopes. It's a little harder when you just drop in somewhere else. And I think it's true with music too. So sometimes I get invited to compose like a commission, right? Someone commissions me to write a song for the anniversary of their church, for the papal mass or whatever. And I find that much harder because I've never often been to these places. One way that I try to get into it is ask as many questions as I can of the person commissioning it, ask them to send me videos and writings about the church, histories, all of those things that might give me some signals of what is the deepest sense of this community. But I literally try to envision the people praying the song.
I know that you have gone to Australia and New Zealand to lead a series of workshops on music. And I have been following you along on your Facebook page. And I wonder if you can say something about your experience of leading workshop in the Pacific.
Yeah, I spent about 3.5 weeks traveling throughout Australia and New Zealand, giving talks, concerts, workshops, and it was really an incredible experience. I had been once before to the Australian Pastoral Musicians Conference in, I think it was 2019. And the coordinator of that conference had said, "Hey, we'd love to have you back to really see the country, get to know communities." And then, of course, COVID put that off for a while. I've been on sabbatical this year. So finally, I had the opportunity to do it. So he coordinated this tour. I think we were in 5 or 6 different cities. I think Australia is the second most populous English speaking Catholic country in the world outside the US. They have a lot of support, especially for Catholic schools. I was in both schools and parishes and other venues speaking to folks, and it was a wonderful experience just to be out of the US context, but also speaking to fellow English speaking Catholics about where they're at. One of the probably scariest things I did is I spoke to 2 groups of high schoolers. I'm not used to speaking to high school students. It's a very different experience than the kind of master's students I teach at Candler or the usual adult groups I speak to. But that was actually a wonderful thing to do because learning how to connect. I know you know this as a teacher, like you really find out if you know something, if you can say it as plainly as possible. And if you can get a group of high schoolers to buy into it, then, maybe you're onto something. So that was delightful. But I would say the highlight of the trip was the time in New Zealand, which I wasn't expecting. I had the opportunity to give a workshop on my final day to a group of a couple hundred folks, and it was so diverse: Samoans and Tongans and Filipinos and Native folks as well. And I didn't realize that many of them had been singing a mass setting I had written about 15 years ago. And all of them were telling me about the ways they did it. The African woman came up to me and said, "We do it with drums." And the Tongans were telling me how they do it with their instruments and so forth. And it was just an electric time and a delight to be with those folks.
It must be very rewarding to hear that your music has been so well received.
One of the things that I try to do in my music is it's this paradox, right? I try to write very contextually for a community, but I try to write it in a way that hopefully any community can make it their own. So they can introduce their own style, their own cultures to it, and the melody remains the same, but how they actually realize it and flesh it is different. And so seeing that realized in such a profound way so far away was very moving to me.
In addition to being a composer, you are also a scholar, and your first book, Commodified Communion, has been very well received. And can you say something about the themes of that book and what do you want the audience to take away from it?
My path to academia really began in church work. I was a music minister at parishes in Chicago, at a university in Los Angeles. And so it was very much rooted in those communities. And one of the things I was always inspired by was all of the scholarship around liturgy and ethics that really emphasizes how important it is that our worship carry over into our daily lives, right? That there be intimate connections between how we worship and how we live. And at the same time, as I kind of read into the literature preparing for this book, I realized that some of it was maybe a little bit overly optimistic. Yes, our worship should be reflected in our daily lives. And no, it doesn't always happen, at least in the ways we maybe state it sometimes, that we imagine it being a lot of the scholarship about liturgy and ethics talks about the formative nature of liturgy towards ethical ends. And I kind of became a little skeptical as I read. As I reflected on my own experience, I realized that for as many times as I can point to examples when liturgy seems to have formed a community for good, liturgy is always reflecting its surrounding cultures for better and for worse. And it's both been a force for incredible good, but it's also participated in all of the dysfunction and sinfulness of culture as well since the beginning. So it's sounding a cautionary note to anyone who wants to say that liturgy, Eucharist forms us against things like consumerism. Actually, I think Eucharist often participates in those very cultures for better and for worse, inevitably, like it always has. So that's the kind of cautionary point. I say, yeah, we should watch out when we say liturgy resists X, whether it's consumerism or racism or xenophobia, misogyny. Actually, it's often participated in those things, right? But I don't want it to just be deconstructive and say, okay, so all of you are wrong. I also wanted it to have a hopeful foundation as well. And so the hopeful kind of turn it takes is to say, God is always present in and in spite of our participation in these structures. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't work, and gosh, now more than ever, work to resist them, but we should always do it with an awareness of the limits of our own resistances and how right at the moments we think we're like perfectly resisting some issue in the culture, we should maybe just take that as a point to circle back and realize that probably even still we're participating in it. And the good news is God is present even in the mess of it all.
You are Director of Catholic Studies at the school. Can you share with us what are the growing trends in this particular field?
I want to sound a note of gratitude for my institution. I think we're the first Protestant seminary with a Catholic studies program within it. And Atlanta is the largest Catholic archdiocese in the country without a major Catholic university in it. Really, Candler and Emory has stepped up to serve that population who's always been present, but in a formal way. And that I've been so grateful for. We have some of the most interesting Catholic students. I know many of them have gravitated to your classes and have been grateful for your wisdom as well. And so it's a wonderful part of our community. In terms of the field of Catholic studies, I think there's several growing trends. The sheer diversity of Catholicism globally, but especially as it's manifested in the US, is something that I think needs to concern all of our scholarship. Here in Atlanta, for example, I believe that we're at about 50% of Catholics being Latine. And then we have many Asian Catholics. We have a huge historic Black Catholic population. And often studies of Catholicism in the US for several decades have centered a whiteness or just a presumed whiteness, whether they name it or not. So dealing with, embracing the complexity of all of those, that cultural mixing that's happening in the US especially, is a growing trend. Related to that, I think people are increasingly focused on issues around immigration in the church because of the previous pope and the current one, issues around care for the earth and how our faith impacts that. And I think also we are still necessarily contending with the legacies of abuse that have happened in the Catholic Church and trying to reckon with it, tell stories, and imagine new paths forward to prevent it from happening in the future.
You have been on the media talking about the election of Pope Leo. Are you excited that we have a Pope from the United States?
Yeah, I was shocked, to be quite honest. I think I did at least two spots before he was elected, and I was certain that it would not be someone from the US. Take anything I say with a grain of salt. And I loved Pope Francis. He was not a perfect human, like none of us are, but he gave me a lot of hope as especially a young Catholic at the time, seeking a church that was more welcoming of the fullness of who people actually are and not always just who we imagine them to be. So I was very inspired by Pope Francis's vision of encounter and accompaniment. And I didn't know what to expect. I kind of half expected to be let down no matter who was elected after that amazing change of direction that he realized. So when Pope Leo was elected, I was almost speechless. I remember FaceTiming a friend and we just held up the phones and stared at each other with our mouths open. We weren't expecting this. What do we say about this? But since his election, I felt even more hopeful. He's a very different personality than Pope Francis, but it seems to me he wants to realize so many of the reforms that Pope Francis put forward, but didn't have time to realize in structural, institutional ways. And he seems deeply committed to that in everything that he says and does from his first moments on the balcony. So I'm feeling really hopeful about the future under Leo.
I know that you are working on a second book. Can you share with us what it is about?
My second book, it's tentatively titled An Intimate Notion of Things, and it focuses on transformations in material Catholicism in the US after Vatican II. When I was writing my first book, one of the ways that I put my argument on the ground was by focusing on particular objects that were commodified in some way, sacred things mainly. And I was really thinking about and realizing just how much material Catholicism shifted at Vatican II. Either things changed, we needed new things to do the liturgy with, is just one example, like of hundreds of things that Catholics all of a sudden needed differently. But then other things remained the same, but our relationship to them changed. And I think of things that fall under that category, like certain devotional things, like the rosary. The rosary in substance more or less stayed the same, but there was a different relationship with those devotional objects. And so much of the literature around Vatican II is necessarily about its texts and understanding what its text said and what the process of Vatican II meant for how we should understand those texts. But I really wanted to tell that story as it happened in the US through objects. So each chapter focuses on a different object and tries to illuminate some aspect of Vatican II. So one chapter, for example, is on shifts in Eucharistic bread making, which was made by convents and then ultimately was privatized, and then what that says about the church's relationship to the modern world and kind of complicate some of the binaries that exist. Another chapter is on the rosary. Another chapter is on Roman Catholic hymnals, obviously something very dear to my heart, and so forth. And so I'm excited. It's required a lot of archival work as well as a lot of interview work with people. And material Catholicism is my jam these days. So it's exciting to tell these stories that way.
I can't wait to read it. And we are very honored that you are going to perform a song for us. Can you tell us what this song is about?
I'm going to share a song that I think you know called I Will Lift My Eyes. It's a song that I wrote actually when I was beginning doctoral studies. I was going through a lot of transition in my life. I think any budding doctoral students can relate to at least part of that. It's a big shift in how your daily rhythm of life. And I was also at the same time working on a project around themes of Christian pilgrimage. And a friend of mine who I was collaborating with from Ireland, he's an Irish priest named Liam Lawton, sent me a little poem from a medieval Celtic pilgrim. And it began, "It is time for me to leave the shelter of my habitation and set sail over the winds of the bold and splendid sea." And I thought, wow, there's a song in there somewhere. I just got to listen for it. And so I would repeat those words back to me every day, and a tune came, and then other verses came reflecting on Thomas Merton. He appears in the song, and of course the Psalm 121 itself, "I will lift my eyes to the mountains, from where shall come my help." And it's really a song of hope in a time of deep transition, and it's been a meaningful song for me in my own life.
This is my favorite song, and especially during the pandemic, I listened to it very often. And thank you very much for composing it.
Thank you.
It is time for me shelter of safety, to sail as a pilgrim over the waves of the sea. It is time to be still and to seek the Son of Mary, time to rest, time to leave behind my fears. And I will not fear the storm, though it rages around me, for slowly I am learning to place my trust in you, to forgive every hurt and to loosen every burden, to let go and to follow where you lead. And I will lift my eyes to the mountains, from where shall come my help? My help shall come from the Lord. So I'll walk in the light of the path set before me, for I know your love will show me the way. Though I know you have prepared a path for me to follow, I'll never know for certain that I follow where you lead. Still I trust that my desire to please you will guide me, and I trust that you will keep me from harm. And I will lift my eyes to the mountains, from where shall come my help? My help shall come from the Lord. So I'll walk in the light of the path set before me, for I know your love will show me the way. And I may stumble, I may fall, and get lost on the journey, and my path will surely lead me to the shadow of death. Yet I will not fear the storm, for you are ever with me, never leaving me to face my fears alone. And I will lift my eyes to the mountains, from where shall come my help? My help shall come from the Lord. So I'll walk in the light of the path set before me, for I know your love will show me the way.
Thank you very much, Tony, for performing for us. Please support Quark and Roll by clicking comment and subscribe. I will see you in the next episode.